Hello, everyone, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So, settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as I parked my RV at the edge of the dense forest that lined the shore of Blackwood River. I'd been coming here for years, ever since I was a kid, tagging along with my old man on his fishing trips. Back then, it was about the thrill of catching the biggest bass. Now, as a 34-year-old accountant from Wilmington, I just needed a place to clear my head, away from the mind-numbing spreadsheets and corporate double talk. This river was my escape, a piece of tranquility that hadn't changed since I first cast a line into its dark waters. My name's Brock Jensen. Folks usually say I'm an easygoing guy, quick with a joke, but not the kind to back down when pushed. My life, well, it's pretty ordinary. Work's good enough. I've got a small place in the city, and I'm single, though not for lack of trying. The dating scene isn't exactly kind to a guy who'd rather spend his weekends alone in the woods. I'm okay with that. I'd take the silence of these trees over awkward small talk any day. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between casting lines, I wonder if there's something more out there for me. Someone who might understand why I need these escapes. Why the sound of leaves rustling in the wind feels more like home than any four walls ever could. As I stepped out of the RV, the crunch of gravel under my boots brought back a flood of memories. I could almost hear my dad's laughter echoing across the water, see his weathered hands working the fishing line with practiced ease. He'd been gone for 5 years now, taken too soon by a heart attack that no one saw coming. These trips to Blackwood River were my way of keeping his memory alive, of holding on to the lessons he'd taught me about patience, about finding peace in solitude. Setting up camp was a breeze. I've got it down to a science by now. Unfold the awning, set out the chairs, crack open a beer, and let the stress of the week dissolve into the calm ripple of the river. The weather was cool. A slight breeze brushing through the leaves, and the sun was just dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the water. It was perfect. As I sat there watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the river's surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to linger a little longer, or how the usual chorus of forest sounds seemed muted, as if the woods were holding their breath. I brushed it off as paranoia, a side effect of too many late nights poring over financial reports. The first night was uneventful. I grilled some steaks over the fire, watched the stars come out, and drifted off to sleep with the gentle murmur of the river in my ears. But my dreams were restless, filled with shapeless forms that slithered just out of sight, always on the periphery of my vision. I woke early the next morning, eager to shake off the unease that had followed me into sleep. The fish were biting, and by noon I had a couple of good-sized trout chilling in the cooler. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I loved this place. Simple, peaceful, and undisturbed. As the day wore on, I decided to explore a bit. There was an old trail I hadn't walked in years, one that wound deeper into the woods, far from the riverbank. The locals used to tell stories about this part of the forest, tales of strange lights and eerie sounds that would send a chill down your spine. I'd never bought into that stuff. Ghost stories are for kids, right? But as I set off down the overgrown path, pushing through thick underbrush, I couldn't help but recall some of those old legends. There was one about a logging camp that disappeared overnight back in the 1930s, every man vanishing without a trace. Another spoke of Native American tribes that refused to set foot in these woods, calling them cursed ground. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. I was a grown man, for Christ's sake, not some superstitious kid huddled around a campfire. Still, I couldn't ignore the way the forest seemed to close in around me, the canopy overhead growing denser with each step, blocking out more and more of the afternoon sun. The usual sounds, birds, squirrels, the rustling of leaves, seemed to fade, replaced by an unnerving stillness. I paused for a moment, listening, but heard nothing. Just the wind, I told myself, ignoring the fact that I couldn't feel even the slightest breeze against my skin. After about an hour, I reached a clearing I didn't recognize. It was small, circular, with a large flat stone at the center. The stone was strange, too smooth, too perfectly round to be natural. I approached it cautiously, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence of the clearing. As I got closer, I noticed odd markings etched into the stone surface. They weren't like any language I'd ever seen, more like abstract symbols or pictographs. Some looked like twisted versions of animals, others like stars or celestial bodies. But there was one that stood out, repeated several times around the edge of the stone, a shape that looked unsettlingly like a human figure, but wrong somehow, its limbs too long and bent at impossible angles. I ran my hand over the symbols, tracing their outlines with my fingers. As I did, I felt a faint vibration like something humming beneath the surface. The stone was cool to the touch, unnaturally so given the warmth of the day. I stepped back, suddenly uneasy. I'd been in these woods hundreds of times, but I'd never seen anything like this. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind me, and I whirled around, heart pounding. There was nothing there, just the dense wall of trees surrounding the clearing. But I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape darting between the trunks. Shrugging off the weird vibe, I decided it was time to head back. The sun was beginning to set, and I didn't want to get caught out here in the dark. I retraced my steps, but the way back seemed longer, the trees denser. The shadows stretched further, twisting the familiar path into something unrecognizable. I quickened my pace, but the sense of unease grew with every step. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, louder than the crunch of leaves underfoot. The forest seemed to be closing in around me, branches reaching out like grasping fingers, roots rising up to trip my feet. Just when I thought I might be lost, might have to spend the night in these increasingly menacing woods, I caught a glimpse of water through the trees. Relief washed over me as I pushed through the last of the undergrowth and found myself back at the riverbank, my campsite just a short distance away. But as I approached, I noticed something strange. The fire I'd left smoldering was out, not just dead, but buried under a mound of dirt and rocks. I hadn't done that. I never would have. My first instinct was to laugh it off, maybe a prankster or some animal. But there was no one around and no signs of tracks. Just the fire, smothered as if someone or something had wanted to erase all evidence of human presence. Feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, I walked to the edge of the river and splashed some water on my face. The cool liquid helped clear my head, but as I straightened up, wiping water from my eyes, I saw it. A large, dark shape gliding just beneath the surface. At first I thought it was a log, but it moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I watched, frozen, as it circled near the shore before disappearing into the deeper water. I knew this river well, and there was nothing in it that size, at least nothing that should be moving like that. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. It had been a long day, and I was probably just seeing things, the fading light playing tricks on my eyes, turning harmless river debris into imaginary monsters. Still, I kept my eyes on the water as I walked back to the RV, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickle with every step. The night came quickly, the darkness pressing in around the campsite. I locked the RV doors, a habit I'd never bothered with before, and settled into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept drifting back to the clearing, to that stone with its bizarre symbols, and to the dark shape in the water. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't shake. The forest I'd known and loved for years suddenly felt alien, hostile. Every creak of the RV in the wind, every rustle from the trees outside set my nerves on edge. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd let those old ghost stories get to me, but deep down I knew this was different. This wasn't the product of an overactive imagination or campfire tales. There was something out there, something that didn't want me here. As I lay there staring at the ceiling of the RV, I made a decision. First thing in the morning, I'd pack up and head home. Whatever was going on in these woods, I wanted no part of it. But as the old saying goes, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And in the depths of Blackwood Forest, something was stirring. Something that had no intention of letting me leave so easily. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thud against the side of the RV. I shot up, heart racing, and listened. Another thud, this time accompanied by a scraping sound, like claws dragging across metal. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and flicked it on, shining it toward the windows. Nothing, just the stillness of the night outside. The thudding grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the sides. It was coming from above. Something was on the roof. I bolted upright, grabbing the closest thing I had for a weapon, a tire iron from the compartment under the bed. The sound moved across the roof, heavy and deliberate, like something was crawling, testing the weight of the vehicle. My hands were slick with sweat as I edged toward the door, the tire iron held tight in my white-knuckled grip. I had no idea what I was about to face, but I knew I couldn't stay inside, trapped like a rat in a cage. With a deep breath, I flung the door open and leaped outside, shining the flashlight up at the roof. What I saw defied all reason or logic. It was a creature straight out of a nightmare, something that could not exist in our world. The thing was massive, its body a grotesque fusion of scales and fur, like some nightmarish hybrid of a crocodile and a wild boar. Its limbs were too long, too jointed, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Wicked claws, easily the length of my forearm, dug into the metal of the RV's roof, leaving deep gouges in their wake. But it was the creature's face that truly paralyzed me with fear. Its head was elongated, almost canine in shape, but hairless and covered in a patchwork of scales and raw, pulsating flesh. Multiple eyes, glowing with an otherworldly intelligence, were scattered across its face in no discernible pattern. And its mouth, dear God! Its mouth was a gaping maw lined with row upon row of jagged teeth, dripping with a viscous, black fluid that sizzled when it hit the ground. The thing let out a low, rumbling noise, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones and set my teeth on edge. It turned its grotesque head toward me, those unnatural eyes locking onto mine, and I knew then that this was no ordinary animal. No bear or wolf or anything that should exist in these woods. This was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent. I stood there, frozen in terror, nearly dropping the flashlight as the creature regarded me with what I could only describe as cruel curiosity. Then, without warning, it leaped from the roof, landing with a sickening thud just feet from where I stood. The ground shook with the impact, and I stumbled backward, my survival instincts finally kicking in. The creature lunged at me, faster than I could react, knocking me to the ground. I felt its claws tear into my side, a burning pain that shot through my entire body. I screamed, thrashing wildly, and managed to land a lucky blow with the tire iron against its head. The creature recoiled, shaking its massive form, and I took the opportunity to scramble to my feet. Adrenaline surged through me as I ran toward the riverbank, my sides screaming in pain with every step. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush, snarling and howling like nothing I'd ever heard before. The sound was a mixture of rage and hunger, primal and terrifying. I made it to the river, my lungs burning, blood soaking through my shirt, and without thinking, I plunged into the icy water. The current was strong, stronger than I remembered, but I let it carry me downstream, away from whatever that thing was. I swam until my arms gave out, until I couldn't hear the sounds of the forest anymore, just the rush of the river. Finally, I pulled myself onto the shore, gasping for breath, my body shaking from cold and fear. I didn't know how far I'd gone, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The creature could still be out there, hunting me. I crawled to a nearby tree, using it to pull myself up, and started limping through the woods, desperate to find some sign of civilization. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But nothing fit. There was no logic, no reason for that thing to exist. Was it some kind of mutant, the result of a government experiment gone wrong? Or was it something older, something that had always been here, hiding in the depths of the forest, emerging only to feed on unfortunate souls who wandered too far from safety? After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a road, deserted and silent in the pre-dawn light. I collapsed on the asphalt, too exhausted to move, but not before I saw headlights approaching in the distance. I waved my arms weakly, praying it wasn't some hallucination, and to my relief, the car stopped. A man got out, his face pale with shock as he saw the state I was in. He asked if I was okay, but all I could do was mutter something about a creature, a monster in the woods. He didn't seem to believe me, not really, but he helped me into the car and sped off toward the nearest town. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms and police interviews. They patched up my wounds, but the doctors seemed baffled by the nature of the injuries. The claw marks were unlike anything they'd seen before, and the wounds resisted normal treatment, refusing to close properly. The police went back to the campsite. They found the RV torn apart just as I described, and the stone in the clearing with its bizarre symbols. But there was no sign of the creature. No tracks, no fur or scales, nothing to prove that what I'd seen was real. Some of the officers believed me, though. How could they not, with the blood and claw marks that were all too real? But others, I could tell, thought I was crazy. That I'd had some kind of mental break, hurt myself, and conjured up a monster to explain it all. I never went back to Blackwood River. Whatever that thing was, it was real, and it was still out there somewhere in those woods. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear its howl, still feel the weight of its body as it pinned me to the ground. I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I'll see its twisted form looming over my bed, those unnatural eyes gleaming in the darkness. But that's all there is to say, really. I'm alive, and that's what matters. I've tried to move on, to forget about what happened in those woods. But I know the truth now. I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation, creatures that lurk in the shadows of our reality. And I can never unknow that. For months after the incident, I struggled to return to normal life. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, plagued as I was by nightmares of gnashing teeth and glowing eyes. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. I threw myself into my work, hoping that the monotony of numbers and spreadsheets would drown out the memories of that night. But the scars remained, both physical and mental. The claw marks on my side refused to heal properly, leaving angry red welts that ached in cold weather. Doctors were baffled, running test after test, but finding no explanation for why the wounds wouldn't close. In the end, they chalked it up to some unknown infection and prescribed a cocktail of antibiotics that did little to help. I became obsessed with finding answers. Late at night, when sleep eluded me, I'd scour the internet for any information I could find about Blackwood River and its surrounding forest. Most of what I found was typical tourist information or fishing guides. But occasionally, buried deep in obscure forums or local history sites, I'd catch glimpses of stories that echoed my own. There were tales of missing hikers, of strange lights seen deep in the woods, of eerie sounds that couldn't be explained away as wildlife. One account, posted anonymously on a paranormal investigation website, described a creature disturbingly similar to what I'd encountered. The post was quickly deleted, but not before I'd saved a copy. proof that I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced. As the months turned into years, I found myself drawn back to Blackwood River, not physically, but mentally. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, some crucial piece of the puzzle that would make sense of it all. The smooth stone with its bizarre symbols haunted my thoughts. What was it? Who had put it there? And what connection did it have to the creature? It was during one of my late-night research sessions, almost 3 years after my encounter, that I stumbled upon a name that would change everything. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a professor of anthropology at a nearby university. She had published several papers on the folklore and legends of the Blackwood River area, including one that mentioned the Starstone, a mysterious artifact said to have been worshipped by ancient tribes in the region. With trembling hands, I emailed Dr. Vance, expecting yet another dead end. To my surprise, she responded within hours, expressing keen interest in my story. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Wilmington, far from the shadows of Blackwood Forest. Dr. Vance was not what I expected. She was a small, wiry woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. As I recounted my experience, she listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes in a worn leather journal. When I finished, she sat back, a grave expression on her face. "Mr. Jensen," she said, her voice low, "what you encountered that night was something my colleagues and I have been studying for years. We believe it to be a guardian, a protector of sorts, tied to the land itself." She went on to explain that the stone I'd found was indeed the Starstone of legend, an ancient artifact of immense power. According to her research, it served as a gateway between our world and somewhere else. The creature I'd seen was likely drawn to the stone's energy, emerging to defend it against perceived threats. "But why me?" I asked, my voice cracking. I wasn't trying to harm anything. I was just camping, like I'd done 100 times before. Dr. Vance shook her head. "Intent doesn't matter to these beings, Mr. Jensen. Your presence alone, especially your touch on the stone, would have been enough to trigger a response. You're lucky to have escaped with your life." As we talked, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Here finally was someone who believed me, who could offer some explanation for the inexplicable. Dr. Vance shared more of her research, painting a picture of a hidden world existing alongside our own, filled with forces and beings beyond our comprehension. In the weeks that followed, I found myself working closely with Dr. Vance and her team. My experience, combined with my financial background, proved valuable in securing funding for their research. We never returned to the exact spot of my encounter. The risks were too great, but we explored other areas of the forest, gathering data and piecing together the puzzle of Blackwood River's secrets. Slowly, I began to heal. The nightmares became less frequent, the paranoia less acute. Understanding, even if it was just a fraction of the truth, brought a measure of peace. I still bear the scars of that night, both physical and emotional, but they no longer define me. Today, 5 years after my encounter, I lead a different life. I left my accounting job, using my skills instead to manage the finances of Dr. Vance's research foundation. We've made remarkable progress in understanding the phenomena surrounding Blackwood River, though we've only scratched the surface of what's really out there. I still camp, believe it or not. Not at Blackwood River, never there again, but in other forests, other wild places. I've learned to appreciate the beauty of nature again, while always maintaining a healthy respect for its mysteries. Every time I sit by a campfire, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, I'm reminded of how little we truly know about the world around us. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the fire has burned low and the forest grows still, I think I can hear something moving in the darkness beyond the light. A part of me tenses, ready to run, to fight. But another part, the part that's grown and changed since that night by Blackwood River, simply acknowledges it. There are things in this world beyond our understanding, creatures that defy explanation. They were here long before us, and they'll be here long after we're gone. All we can do is respect their existence, protect the wild places they call home, and hope that in doing so, we can find a way to coexist in this vast, mysterious universe we all share. As for the thing in Blackwood River, it's still out there, I'm sure of it, waiting, watching, guarding secrets we may never fully comprehend. And in a strange way, I'm okay with that. Some mysteries I've learned are better left unsolved. My name is Nolan Brackett, and this is the story of how my life and the lives of everyone in our small town of Cayuga changed forever. It was the summer of 2011, a time that should have been filled with the laughter of children on vacation and the buzz of lawnmowers on lazy Saturday mornings. Instead, it became a season of fear, suspicion, and loss that would haunt us for years to come. I've been a police officer in Cayuga for 15 years. It's a small town in upstate New York. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, where doors are left unlocked at night, and where the biggest crime is usually a teenager swiping a six-pack from the corner store. At least that's how it used to be. The day everything changed started like any other. I was at the station nursing my third cup of coffee and trying to wake up properly. The night shift had been quiet. Just a couple of noise complaints and a drunk who needed a ride home. Nothing out of the ordinary. My partner, Jake Stoddard, was at his desk across from mine. Jake was a rookie, fresh out of the academy, with an earnest face and a perpetual look of enthusiasm that sometimes grated on my nerves. But he was a good kid, and he had a knack for lightening the mood with his terrible jokes. "Hey, Nolan," Jake said, looking up from a stack of paperwork. "Did you hear about old man Dunleavy's missing goats again? He thinks aliens took them this time." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Aliens, huh? Maybe Bigfoot gave them a lift. You know, I'm starting to think Dunleavy's missing goats are just wandering off because they're tired of his conspiracy theories." Jake was about to respond with what I'm sure would have been another groan-worthy quip when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting another call about a lost dog or a noise complaint from Mrs. Henderson about the Thompson kids' rock band practice. "Cayuga Police Department. Officer Brackett speaking." The voice on the other end was trembling, thick with worry. "Nolan, it's Margaret Vance. You gotta come quick. It's my daughter, Emily. She didn't come home last night." I felt a chill run down my spine. Emily Vance was a good kid, 17 years old, smart as a whip, always respectful. She was the kind of teenager who made you think maybe the next generation wasn't going to hell in a handbasket after all. It wasn't like her to disappear. "Okay, Margaret, calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're on our way. Don't touch anything in Emily's room, all right? We'll be there soon." I hung up and turned to Jake. "We've got a missing person. Emily Vance didn't come home last night." Jake's eyes widened. "Emily, but she's not the type to—" "I know," I cut him off. "That's why we're going now. Come on." We jumped into the cruiser and sped to the Vance residence, a modest two-story house on Elm Street. The summer heat was already building, the air thick and heavy with humidity. As we pulled up, I saw Margaret pacing on the front porch, her face pale and drawn with fear. She rushed down the steps as we got out of the car. "Nolan, Jake, thank God you're here. I don't know what to do. Emily's never done anything like this before." "Let's go inside, Margaret," I said gently, guiding her back to the house. "Tell us everything you know." Once we were seated in the living room, Margaret took a deep breath and began. She was at the library studying for her finals. She texted me around 8 p.m., said she was coming home, but she never did. I stayed up waiting, thinking maybe she'd lost track of time with her friends. But when she wasn't here this morning, Her voice trailed off, and she buried her face in her hands. Jake leaned forward, his voice soft. "Mrs. Vance, did Emily mention meeting anyone? Any plans after studying?" Margaret shook her head. "No, nothing. She was so focused on her exams. She wouldn't have gone off without telling me, especially not on a school night." I nodded, my mind already racing through possibilities. "Okay, Margaret, we're going to need to look at Emily's room, and we'll need her phone records. Can you call the phone company and authorize them to release that information to us?" As Margaret went to make the call, Jake and I headed upstairs to Emily's room. It was neat and tidy, posters of bands I'd never heard of on the walls, a desk piled high with textbooks and notebooks. Nothing seemed out of place. No sign of a struggle or hasty packing. "What do you think, Nolan?" Jake asked, his voice low. I shook my head. "I don't know, kid, but I've got a bad feeling about this. Let's hope we're wrong." We spent the next hour combing through Emily's room, looking for any clue that might tell us where she'd gone. We found her diary, but it revealed nothing more than the usual teenage concerns: stress about exams, gossip about friends, a crush on a boy in her English class. Nothing to suggest she was planning to run away or meet someone in secret. As we were finishing up, Margaret called us back downstairs. She'd gotten the phone records, and there was something odd. The last message Emily received was from an unknown number. The content was cryptic: "Meet me at the old mill." The old mill. A derelict building on the outskirts of town. A place kids sometimes went to for a thrill or to make out away from prying eyes. It had been abandoned for years, deemed unsafe by the town council, but that hadn't stopped it from becoming a local hangout spot. Jake and I exchanged a look. We both knew we had to check it out. "Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "we're going to head to the old mill to take a look. I want you to stay here in case Emily comes home or tries to contact you. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "You'll call me if you find anything, right?" "Of course," I assured her. "We'll let you know as soon as we know anything." As we headed back to the cruiser, I could feel the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. In 15 years on the force, we'd had our share of missing persons, but they were usually drunks who'd wandered off or kids who'd run away after a fight with their parents. They almost always turned up within a day or two, sheepish and apologetic. But this felt different. Emily wasn't the type to disappear without a word, and that cryptic text message set off every alarm bell in my head. Jake must have sensed my unease. "We'll find her, Nolan," he said, as we pulled away from the Vance house. "She's probably just lost track of time with some friends." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to believe him, but years on the job had taught me that hope could be a dangerous thing. Sometimes the worst-case scenario was exactly what you found. As we drove towards the old mill, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. The old building loomed ahead, its broken windows like dark, empty eyes staring out at us. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and for a moment I wished I'd called for backup. But there was no time for that now. If Emily was here, we needed to find her. And if she wasn't, well, we'd cross that bridge when we came to it. I parked the cruiser a little way from the mill, not wanting to announce our presence if anyone was inside. Jake and I got out, flashlights in hand, and approached the building cautiously. The door hung off its hinges, creaking ominously in the light evening breeze. I signaled to Jake to stay close as we entered, our flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The air inside was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Our footsteps echoed on the bare concrete floor, every sound seeming unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. "Emily!" I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. "Emily Vance, it's Officer Brackett. Are you here?" No response, just the hollow echo of my own voice coming back to me. We moved deeper into the building, checking every corner, every shadowy recess. The beam of my flashlight caught something near the back of the room, a splash of color against the drab gray of the concrete. My heart sank as I approached. It was Emily's backpack, her books strewn about as if dropped in a hurry. But there was no sign of Emily herself. "Jake," I called, my voice tight. "Over here." He joined me, his face paling as he saw the backpack. "Jesus, Nolan, what do you think happened?" I shook my head, trying to keep my professional demeanor even as a cold dread settled in my stomach. "I don't know, but we need to call this in. This is a crime scene now." As Jake radioed for backup and forensics, I continued to search the area around the backpack. That's when I saw it, a small dark stain on the concrete. I leaned in closer, my flashlight illuminating it clearly. Blood. In that moment, I knew. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. Something terrible had happened to Emily Vance, and it was up to us to figure out what. As we waited for backup to arrive, I stood in the empty mill, the weight of what lay ahead settling heavily on my shoulders. The peaceful summer I had been looking forward to had just turned into a nightmare, and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Little did I know then just how deep this case would go, or how it would change not only my life, but the very fabric of our small town. The shadows that had always lurked at the edges of Cayuga were about to step into the light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The shadows that had always lurked at the edges of Cayuga were about to step into the light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were a blur of activity. The mill had been cordoned off, forensics teams combing every inch for evidence. Emily's backpack and the bloodstain were our only solid leads, and they painted a grim picture. I'd had to break the news to Margaret that we'd found evidence suggesting foul play. The look on her face as the realization hit her is something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. No parent should ever have to hear those words about their child. The whole town was on edge. Cayuga had always been the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids played in the streets until dark. Now, an eerie quiet had settled over the community. Parents kept their children close, and suspicious glances were cast at strangers and neighbors alike. Jake and I threw ourselves into the investigation, working around the clock. We interviewed everyone who had seen Emily in the days leading up to her disappearance. The librarian, Mrs. Dunbar, remembered seeing Emily leave around 7:30 p.m. on the night she vanished. She seemed in good spirits, Mrs. Dunbar told us, her brow furrowed with concern. Said she was meeting a friend for coffee before heading home. That led us to the local coffee shop, a popular hangout for teens. The barista, Sam, a lanky guy with a permanent smirk, confirmed he'd seen Emily that night. "Yeah, she was here with Lucas," Sam said, wiping down the counter. "They left together around 8, I think." Lucas, Emily's friend and study partner. We tracked him down at his home, a nervous, lanky kid with a habit of biting his nails. He seemed genuinely distraught about Emily's disappearance. "We were studying together," Lucas said, his eyes darting nervously. "But then she got a text and said she had to meet someone. I offered to go with her, but she said it was fine. I should have insisted. It's not your fault, Lucas," I reassured him, even as I made a mental note of his behavior. "In cases like these, you can never rule anyone out." "Did Emily say who she was meeting?" Lucas shook his head. "No, she just said she had to go." I thought maybe it was her mom or something. We dug deeper into Emily's phone records, tracing the unknown number that had sent the text about the old mill. It led us to a burner phone, purchased at a convenience store in town. The surveillance footage showed a man in a hoodie, his face obscured, buying the phone. It wasn't much, but it was something. As we expanded our investigation, a name surfaced: Harold Gibbons. He was a drifter with a history of petty crimes who had been in and out of Cayuga over the past few months, doing odd jobs and keeping to himself. No one had paid him much attention, but now he was our prime suspect. Jake and I tracked Gibbons down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. When we knocked on his door, he opened it a crack, his eyes darting suspiciously. "Harold Gibbons?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving towards my holster. "Yeah, who's asking?" His voice was gruff, hostile. Officer Brackett and Officer Stoddard. "We need to ask you a few questions." His eyes widened, and he tried to slam the door, but we were ready for it. We pushed through, and Gibbons fought like a cornered animal. It took both of us to subdue him, but we finally got him cuffed and into the cruiser. Back at the station, Gibbons clammed up, refusing to talk without a lawyer. But the evidence was mounting. His fingerprints were on Emily's backpack, and DNA analysis linked him to the blood found at the scene. It seemed like we had our man. Days turned into weeks as we built our case against Gibbons. The town held its breath, hoping for closure, but dreading the final revelation of Emily's fate. Margaret Vance was a shell of her former self, her eyes hollow with grief and uncertainty. Finally, after weeks of interrogation and mounting evidence, Gibbons broke. His confession was chilling in its banality. "I just wanted to rob her," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. But she struggled and I panicked. I didn't mean to kill her." Gibbons led us to where he had hidden Emily's body, deep in the woods outside of town. The scene was grim, the kind that sticks with you no matter how many years you've been on the force. Emily had been strangled, her young life snuffed out in an act of senseless violence. We arrested Gibbons for Emily's murder, and the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monster had been caught, justice would be served. But the scars remained, and Cayuga would never be the same. The trial was a somber affair. The entire town seemed to hold its breath as the proceedings unfolded. Gibbons was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. It should have felt like a victory, but as I watched Margaret Vance's tearful reaction to the verdict, I knew that no punishment could ever truly bring justice for what had been lost. In the months that followed, Cayuga tried to heal. The old mill, the site of Emily's last moments, was torn down. In its place, a memorial park was built, a place of reflection and remembrance. But the shadows of what had happened lingered over the town like a heavy cloud. I threw myself into my work, determined to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Jake, shaken by his first major case, became more serious. The spark of youthful optimism dimmed in his eyes. We made a good team, more in sync now that we had been through the fire together, but something nagged at me. A doubt I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. It was nothing concrete, just a feeling that we had missed something, that the pieces fit together a little too neatly. I found myself revisiting the case files late at night, poring over every detail. Jake noticed my obsession and tried to talk me out of it. "We got him, Nolan," he'd say, concern evident in his voice. "It's over. You need to let it go," but I couldn't. And as it turned out, I was right not to. It was almost a year after Emily's murder when the breakthrough came. I was at my desk, nursing a cold cup of coffee and leafing through the files for the 100th time, when Jake burst in, his face pale. "Nolan, you need to see this," he said, dropping a file on my desk. "There's been another murder. 2 towns over. The M.O. It's identical to Emily's case." My blood ran cold as I scanned the report. A young woman, lured to an abandoned building by a text message, strangled and left in the woods. It was like history repeating itself. "But Gibbons is in prison," I said, my mind racing. "This can't be him," Jake nodded grimly. "Exactly. What if we got the wrong guy?" The implications were staggering. If we had been wrong about Gibbons, it meant the real killer was still out there. It meant we had failed Emily, failed Margaret, failed the entire town of Cayuga. We reopened the investigation, this time looking beyond Gibbons, beyond the easy answers we had accepted before. We dug deeper into Emily's life, her relationships, her online presence. And slowly, a new picture began to emerge. There was a name that kept coming up, someone who had been on the periphery of our initial investigation, but who we had dismissed. Victor Harlan. He had worked odd jobs around town, including at the library where Emily studied. He had left Cayuga shortly after Emily was found, which hadn't seemed suspicious at the time. Drifters came and went all the time, but now, with fresh eyes and new information, we saw the connections we had missed before. Victor had a history of violence, a record that stretched across several states. He was known for targeting vulnerable young women, luring them with charm and false promises. We tracked Victor to a small town in Pennsylvania, working with local authorities to bring him in for questioning. It didn't take long for him to crack under pressure. His confession was even more chilling than Gibbons. Victor had orchestrated the whole thing, using Gibbons as an unwitting accomplice and then as a scapegoat. He had cultivated a friendship with Emily, gaining her trust over time. The text message, the meeting at the mill, it had all been his plan. Gibbons had merely been a pawn, manipulated into taking the fall. The revelation hit Cayuga like a thunderbolt. Emily's case was reopened, and Victor was charged with her murder, along with the murders of several other young women across multiple states. Gibbons, while not innocent of involvement, had his sentence reduced in light of the new evidence. The second trial was even more painful than the first. Margaret Vance had to relive her daughter's death all over again, this time with the added anguish of knowing how close we had come to letting the real killer escape justice. The town was torn between relief that the true culprit had been caught and anger at the system that had failed them. As for me, the weight of our mistake bore down heavily. I'd let my desire for a quick resolution blind me to the inconsistencies in the case. It was a failure I would have to live with for the rest of my career. But amidst the pain and recrimination, there was also a sense of closure. The real killer had been caught, and this time we were certain. Victor Harlan would never hurt anyone again. In the years that followed, Cayuga slowly began to heal. The memorial park became a place of solace rather than sorrow. Margaret Vance, though forever changed by her loss, found purpose in starting a support group for families of victims of violent crimes. Jake and I continued to work together, our bond strengthened by the trials we had faced. We became known for our thoroughness, our refusal to accept easy answers. The shadow of Emily's case hung over us, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the importance of our work. As for me, I found a measure of peace. The guilt never fully went away, but I channeled it into becoming a better cop, a better protector for our community. Every case, every investigation was a chance to honor Emily's memory by seeking the truth, no matter how difficult or complex it might be. Cayuga would never be the same town it was before that fateful summer. The innocence was gone, replaced by a wary vigilance. But there was strength there too, a resilience born from facing the darkness and coming out the other side. As I sit on my porch now, years later, watching the sun set over the trees, I think about Emily, about Margaret, about Victor and Harold, and all the lives touched by this tragedy. The scars are still there, but they've healed into something we can live with. We had faced the shadows that lurked in Cayuga, and though the battle had been costly, we had emerged stronger. Not unscathed, but unbroken, and in the end, that was enough. The summer breeze carries the laughter of children playing in the distance, a sound that once might have been taken for granted, but now feels like a precious gift. Cayuga is alive, moving forward, but never forgetting, and as the last light fades from the sky, I raise my glass in a silent toast. To Emily, to justice, to the long, hard road of healing, and to the hope that by remembering the darkness, we might better appreciate the light. The warm glow of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as I, Jake Thompson, sat on my porch scrolling through my phone. It was a Friday evening in early October, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. I had just finished a long week at the local high school where I taught history, and I was looking forward to a relaxing weekend. As I mindlessly scrolled through my social media feed, a news article caught my eye. Experienced hiker vanishes without a trace in Huckleberry Swamp Nature Area. The headline sent a chill down my spine, despite the lingering warmth of the day. Huckleberry Swamp was less than an hour's drive from my home in Hartford, Connecticut, and I had hiked there numerous times over the years. Curiosity piqued. I tapped on the article and began to read. The missing hiker, identified as 42-year-old Martin Greaves, had last been seen entering the nature area 2 weeks ago. Despite extensive search efforts by local authorities and volunteers, no trace of him had been found. The article mentioned that Greaves was an experienced outdoorsman who had hiked challenging trails all over the country. As I continued reading, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from my friend Marcella Quinn, a vivacious 28-year-old librarian I had met at a local book club a few years back. "Hey, Jake! Tyrese and I were thinking about doing a night hike tomorrow. You in?" I hesitated for a moment, my eyes darting back to the article about the missing hiker. A part of me wanted to mention it to Marcella, but another part dismissed the thought. After all, people went missing in the wilderness all the time, right? It was probably just a coincidence that it happened so close to home. Before I could overthink it, I typed out a reply. "Sounds fun. Where were you thinking of going?" Marcella's response came quickly. "We were thinking Huckleberry Swamp. Tyrese says it's beautiful at night, and the forecast looks clear. Meet at my place around 8. I felt a twinge of unease as I read her message. Huckleberry Swamp? The very place where that hiker had disappeared. I contemplated backing out, but the rational part of my brain kicked in. The swamp was a large area, and the chances of anything happening to us were slim to none. Plus, we'd be in a group, not hiking alone like the missing man. "Count me in," I replied, pushing aside my lingering doubts. "See you tomorrow at 8. As I set my phone down and gazed out at the darkening sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a decision that would change my life forever. Little did I know how right that premonition would turn out to be. The next day passed in a blur of mundane activities. I graded papers, did some laundry, and even managed to squeeze in a quick workout at the local gym. As evening approached, I began to pack my backpack for the night hike. Flashlight? Check. Extra batteries? Check. Water bottle? Check. I methodically went through my mental checklist, ensuring I had everything I might need for a few hours in the woods. As I zipped up my pack, my eyes fell on the local newspaper sitting on my kitchen counter. The headline about the missing hiker stared back at me, seeming to mock my decision to go on this hike. I shook my head, trying to dispel the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at me all day. "It's just a hike, Jake," I muttered to myself. "Nothing to worry about." At precisely 7:45 p.m., I locked up my apartment and headed to my car. The drive to Marcella's place was short, and before I knew it, I was pulling up in front of her modest bungalow. Tyrese's beat-up pickup truck was already parked in the driveway. As I approached the front door, I could hear laughter coming from inside. I knocked, and moments later Marcella swung the door open, her face lit up with a bright smile. "Jake, you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a quick hug. "Come on in, we're just about ready to head out." I stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the warm, inviting atmosphere of Marcella's home. Tyrese Hillman, our other hiking companion for the night, was lounging on the couch, his tall, athletic frame barely fitting on the small piece of furniture. "Hey, man," Tyrese greeted me with a nod and a fist bump. "Ready for some night hiking?" I nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm. "As ready as I'll ever be." Marcella bustled around the living room, double-checking her own backpack. At 28, she was the youngest of our trio, but often the most organized and prepared. Her curly brown hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled with excitement. "So, what made you guys decide on a night hike?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. Tyrese grinned, his white teeth contrasting sharply with his dark skin. "Man, you haven't lived until you've experienced the swamp at night. The sounds, the smells, it's a whole different world." Marcella nodded in agreement. "Plus, there's supposed to be a meteor shower tonight. I thought it might be cool to watch it from the observation deck in the nature area." Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt my earlier apprehension start to fade. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. As we made our final preparations, I debated whether or not to mention the article about the missing hiker. In the end, I decided against it. Why spoil the mood with unnecessary worry? "All right, troops," Marcella announced, hoisting her backpack onto her shoulders. "Let's move out." We piled into Tyrese's truck, the excitement palpable as we set off towards Huckleberry Swamp Nature Area. The sun had long since set, and the world outside the truck's windows was shrouded in darkness. As we drove, Tyrese regaled us with stories from his job as a park ranger. He had a way of spinning tales that made even the most mundane encounters with wildlife sound like epic adventures. Marcella and I listened, laughing at his animated descriptions and terrible animal impressions. Before long, we were pulling into the deserted parking lot of the nature area. As we climbed out of the truck, the silence of the night seemed to engulf us. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under our boots and the distant hoot of an owl. Tyrese led the way to the trailhead, his powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness. Marcella fell in step beside him, while I brought up the rear. As we passed the information board at the start of the trail, I couldn't help but notice a missing person flyer with Martin Greaves's face staring back at me. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickened my pace to catch up with my friends. As we plunged into the dense forest, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the beam of our flashlights. Little did we know that with each step, we were walking deeper into a nightmare that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The Huckleberry Swamp Nature Area was a different place at night. During the day, it was a serene woodland, filled with the cheerful songs of birds and the rustle of small animals. But as we ventured deeper into the forest under the cover of darkness, it felt as if we had stepped into another world entirely. Our flashlights carved narrow paths through the inky blackness, illuminating twisted tree trunks and gnarled roots that seemed to reach out to trip us. The canopy above was so thick that it blocked out most of the starlight, leaving us in an almost oppressive darkness beyond the reach of our artificial light. Tyrese led the way, his confident strides betraying his familiarity with the terrain. As a park ranger, he had walked these trails countless times, but even he seemed more cautious than usual in the all-encompassing night. "Watch your step here," he called back to us, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "The trail gets a bit tricky." I glanced down, noticing how the packed dirt of the trail gave way to loose, shifting soil. The ground beneath our feet was becoming softer, spongier, a sign that we were approaching the swampy areas that gave this place its name. Marcella walked between us, her usual chatter subdued by the eerie atmosphere. Every so often she would startle at a sudden sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, her flashlight beam darting wildly to investigate. "You okay?" I asked her softly, noticing the tension in her shoulders. She nodded, offering a weak smile. "Yeah, just a bit jumpy. It's so different here at night." I understood exactly what she meant. There was something primal about being in the woods after dark, something that stirred ancient fears buried deep in our collective subconscious. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every sound a possible danger. As we continued our hike, the trail began to wind its way deeper into the swamp. The air grew thick and heavy with moisture, carrying the pungent scent of decaying vegetation. Our boots sank slightly with each step, the soft ground threatening to swallow us whole if we lingered too long in one spot. Tyrese paused at a fork in the trail, consulting a map he'd pulled from his pocket. "If we take the left path, it'll lead us to the observation deck," he said. "Should be a good spot to watch for those meteors." We nodded in agreement and followed him down the left-hand trail. This path was narrower, less well-maintained than the main trail we'd been on. Branches reached out from the darkness, snagging our clothes and scratching at exposed skin. As we pushed forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few steps, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, searching the darkness for what? I wasn't sure. But the sensation of unseen eyes boring into me was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Marcella let out a startled gasp. "Did you guys see that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Therese and I both swung our flashlights in the direction she was pointing, but saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. "See what?" Tyrese asked, his tone a mixture of concern and skepticism. Marcella shook her head, her eyes wide. I'm not sure. I thought I saw something move just at the edge of the light, like a shadow, but wrong somehow." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. "Wrong how?" She struggled to find the right words. It was too tall, too thin. Not like a person or an animal, just wrong. Tyrese chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Probably just a branch moving in the wind. This place can play tricks on your eyes at night." But there was no wind, I realized. The air around us was completely still, almost stagnant. We pressed on, but the atmosphere had changed. The excitement of our night hike had been replaced by a growing sense of unease. Even Tyrese, usually so laid back and confident, seemed on edge, his eyes darting from side to side as he led us forward. The trail began to slope upward, and I knew we must be nearing the observation deck. "Just a little further," I told myself. "We'll watch the meteor shower, and then we can head back. Everything will be fine." But as we crested the hill, and the observation deck came into view, silhouetted against the starry sky, an unmistakable crack of a branch echoed through the night. It was close, too close, and far too loud to be caused by any small animal. We all froze, our flashlights scanning the surrounding forest. My heart pounded fiercely as I strained my eyes to penetrate the dense foliage. The moon, which had been providing at least some ambient light, chose that moment to hide behind a bank of thick clouds, plunging the forest into even deeper darkness. Marcella, Tyrese, and I shared uneasy glances. In that moment, I couldn't help but think of the missing hiker. Had he heard a similar sound before he disappeared? Had he felt this same fear coursing through his veins? As we stood there frozen in indecision, I realized that our simple night hike had turned into something far more sinister. Whatever was out there in the darkness, whatever had made that sound, it was clear that we were no longer alone in the Huckleberry Swamp. The silence that followed the loud crack was almost worse than the sound itself. It stretched on, taut as a bowstring, while we stood rooted to the spot, barely daring to breathe. Our flashlight beams danced erratically across the trees, searching for any sign of movement, any clue as to what had made that noise. Tyrese was the first to break the silence. "Okay," he whispered, his usual bravado noticeably absent. "Let's not panic. It was probably just a deer or something." But the look in his eyes betrayed his words. Whatever had snapped that branch was no deer. We all knew it instinctively. "Maybe we should head back," Marcella suggested, her voice barely audible. Her face was pale in the harsh glare of the flashlights, eyes wide with fear. I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can always come back another night for the meteor shower." Tyrese hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between his role as our guide and his own growing unease. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's head back. Stay close together. We turned away from the observation deck, our earlier goal forgotten in the face of this new, unseen threat. Tyrese took the lead again, but his pace was quicker now, more urgent. Marcella fell in behind him, with me bringing up the rear. As we retraced our steps down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of leaves seemed to come from behind us or to our sides, as if something was corralling us along the path. The forest around us had taken on a malevolent air. The trees, which had seemed merely spooky before, now felt actively hostile. Their branches reached out like claws, snagging our clothes and scratching our skin. Roots seemed to rise up from the ground, threatening to trip us with each step. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when Tyrese suddenly stopped short, causing Marcella to bump into him. "Wait!" he hissed, holding up a hand for silence. We froze, straining our ears. At first, I heard nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Then faintly but unmistakably, I picked up the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps splashing through shallow water. "Who's there?" Marcella called out, her voice louder than she probably intended, cracking slightly with fear. The footsteps ceased for a moment, and in that silence, I swear I could hear the sound of heavy breathing. Not our own, but something else. Something bigger. Then the footsteps resumed, more purposeful now, heading directly towards us. "Run!" Tyrese yelled, all pretense of calm abandoned. We took off down the trail, no longer caring about stealth or silence. Branches whipped at our faces as we ran, roots threatened to trip us at every step. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly, creating a disorienting strobe effect that made it even harder to see where I was going. Behind us, I could hear our pursuer crashing through the underbrush. Whatever it was big and it was fast. The sound of its pursuit spurred us on, driving us to run faster than I thought possible. Suddenly, Marcella cried out in pain. I turned to see her sprawled on the ground, clutching her ankle. She must have tripped over a root in our mad dash. Therese and I skidded to a stop, rushing back to help her. As I reached down to help Marcella up, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. Just inches from where she had fallen lay a weathered shoe, caked with mud and partially hidden by leaves. Next to it were scraps of torn fabric, dark stains marring the tattered cloth. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of our heavy breathing. Therese followed my gaze, his eyes widening as he took in the grisly scene. "We need to move," he said urgently, already bending down to help Marcella to her feet. "Can you walk?" Marcella nodded, grimacing as she put weight on her injured ankle. "I think so, but I'll be slow." "Lean on me," I offered, draping her arm over my shoulder. "We'll go as fast as we can." As we set off again, our pace significantly reduced by Marcella's injury, I couldn't help but think about the owner of that shoe. Was it the missing hiker, Martin Greaves? And if so, what had happened to him? The torn clothing and dark stains painted a gruesome picture in my mind. Our pursuer seemed to have fallen back, but I could still hear occasional crashes in the underbrush behind us, reminding us that we were far from safe. The sounds seemed to come from multiple directions now, as if we were being surrounded. "What is that thing?" Marcella whispered, her voice tight with pain and fear. "I don't know," Tyrese replied, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness around us. "But whatever it is, it's not natural." As if to confirm his words, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. The sound sent shivers down my spine and seemed to reverberate in my very bones. We pressed on, every step a struggle against the treacherous terrain and our own mounting terror. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in around us, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. Strange whispers seemed to slide through the trees, just on the edge of hearing. A sour, musky stench filled the air, growing stronger with each passing moment. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flash of movement, too quick and too strange to properly process. But the glimpse I caught was enough to turn my blood to ice. It was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen or imagined. Its body was covered in mottled fur, matted and tangled with twigs and leaves. But it was the creature's shape that defied logic. Elongated limbs that seemed capable of bending in impossible ways, ending in viciously sharp claws. And its face, God, its face. In the brief moment I saw it, I noticed eyes like swirling pools of darkness, filled with a malevolent intelligence that was unmistakably predatory. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with terror.
"It's right there!"
We abandoned all pretense of stealth, crashing through the underbrush in a desperate bid for survival. Marcella whimpered in pain with each step, but adrenaline kept her moving. Tyrese took the lead, using his superior strength to forge a path through the dense vegetation. Behind us, the creature let out a bone-chilling screech and gave chase. I could hear it moving through the forest with unnatural speed and agility, far outpacing what should have been possible in such dense undergrowth. "We can't outrun it," Marcella gasped, her face pale with pain and fear. She was right. With her injured ankle slowing us down and the creature's inhuman speed, it was only a matter of time before it caught up to us. We needed a plan, and fast. "Tyrese!" I shouted between ragged breaths. "Isn't there a ranger station nearby?" Tyrese's face lit up with sudden hope. "Yes, about half a mile east of here. If we can make it there, we might have a chance." With renewed determination, we changed course, heading east as best we could while navigating the treacherous swamp. Every splash of our feet in the shallow water seemed to echo in the unnaturally quiet forest. The creature's pursuit had gone silent, which was somehow even more terrifying than hearing it crash through the underbrush. As we struggled onward, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of our pursuer. What was this thing that defied all logical explanation? Was it some kind of undiscovered species? A government experiment gone wrong? Or something even more sinister? Something that shouldn't exist in our rational, scientific world? My musings were cut short as Tyrese suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. For a moment, all I could hear was our labored breathing and the pounding of my own heart. Then faintly but unmistakably, I heard voices in the distance. "The ranger station," Tyrese whispered, his voice filled with relief. "We're almost there," but our relief was short-lived. From behind us came a sound that could only be described as a roar, a sound filled with rage and hunger that shook the very air around us. The creature had realized its prey was about to escape. "Go!" I yelled, pushing Marcella forward. "Run for the station!" We burst from the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood a sturdy log building, the ranger station. Light spilled from its windows, a beacon of hope in the darkness that had surrounded us. As we sprinted across the open ground, I risked a glance back. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The creature had emerged from the forest, its true form fully visible in the moonlight that now broke through the clouds. It was even more terrifying than the glimpses I'd caught before. A nightmarish amalgamation of animal and something utterly alien. Its eyes locked onto us, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that was unmistakably otherworldly. We reached the ranger station door just as the creature let out another ear-splitting roar. Tyrese wrenched the door open and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. Two startled rangers jumped to their feet, hands instinctively moving to their sidearms. "What the hell?" one of them exclaimed. "Lock the door!" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "There's something out there!" The rangers looked confused, but the terror in our eyes must have convinced them of the seriousness of the situation. One of them quickly secured the door, while the other moved to the radio. "This is Ranger Stevens at Huckleberry Station," he said into the mic. "We have a situation here, requesting immediate backup." As the ranger called for help, I helped Marcella to a chair, finally able to examine her injured ankle. It was swollen and starting to bruise, but thankfully didn't appear to be broken. Tyrese was at the window, peering out into the darkness. "I don't see it," he muttered. "Where did it go?" As if in answer to his question, an unearthly howl split the night, causing us all to jump. It was close, too close. "What exactly is out there?" one of the rangers asked, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered gun. I opened my mouth to respond, but how could I possibly explain what we'd seen? How could I describe a creature that defied all logic and reason? Before I could formulate an answer, a tremendous crash shook the building. Wood splintered, and I turned just in time to see a monstrous clawed hand punching through the wall. The night was far from over, and our ordeal had only just begun. The ranger station erupted into chaos as the creature's massive clawed hand withdrew, leaving a gaping hole in the wall. Splinters of wood littered the floor, and the acrid smell of the beast's musk filled the air. "What the hell is that thing?" One of the rangers, the one who had been on the radio, shouted, his face pale with shock. "I don't know," Tyrese replied, his voice tight with fear. "But it's been chasing us through the swamp for the last hour." The other ranger, Stevens, I recalled, had drawn his sidearm and was aiming it at the hole in the wall. "Whatever it is, it's not getting in here," he declared, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Another crash rocked the building, this time from the roof. Dust and debris rained down on us as the creature's claws tore at the shingles, searching for a way in. Marcella whimpered in fear, clutching her injured ankle. I moved to her side, trying to offer what comfort I could. "It's gonna be okay," I said, wishing I could believe my own words. "Help is on the way!" The radio crackled to life, startling us all. "Huckleberry Station, this is dispatch. We've got units en route to your location. ETA 20 minutes. What's your situation?" The ranger who had made the initial call rushed to respond. "This is Cooper at Huckleberry. We're under attack by some kind of creature. It's trying to break in. We need immediate assistance." "Copy that, Huckleberry. Help is coming. Hold tight. 20 minutes. We just had to survive for 20 minutes. But as another bone-jarring impact shook the station, 20 minutes seemed like an eternity. "We need to barricade the windows and doors," Tyrese said, taking charge of the situation. His ranger training was kicking in, pushing aside his fear. "And we need weapons. Anything we can use to defend ourselves if that thing gets in." We sprang into action, dragging heavy filing cabinets in front of the windows and piling furniture against the door. The rangers distributed what weapons they had: another handgun for Tyrese, a shotgun for me, and a large hunting knife for Marcella. As we worked, the creature continued its assault on the building. Each impact sent tremors through the floor, and the sound of splintering wood told us that our shelter wouldn't hold forever. "What do we do if it gets in before help arrives?" Marcella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stevens, the ranger with the handgun, answered grimly, "We fight. We fight with everything we've got." The next few minutes passed in a blur of tense silence, punctuated by the creature's relentless attacks. We huddled in the center of the room, weapons at the ready, jumping at every sound. Suddenly the assault stopped. The abrupt silence was almost as terrifying as the chaos that had preceded it. "Where did it go?" Cooper whispered, his eyes darting from window to window. As if in answer, a low, rumbling growl emanated from just outside the station. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in our very bones, filling us with a primal terror. Then, slowly, deliberately, something began to scratch at the door. It wasn't the violent assault of before, but somehow this methodical approach was even more terrifying. It was as if the creature was taunting us, letting us know that it could get in whenever it wanted. "It's toying with us," I said, my mouth dry with fear. Tyrese nodded grimly. "It's intelligent, more intelligent than any animal I've ever encountered." The scratching continued, occasionally interspersed with that bone-chilling growl. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into an eternity of terror. Then, just as the tension had reached an unbearable level, we heard it, the distant wail of sirens. "The backup!" Cooper exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "They're almost here!" But our relief was short-lived. As soon as the sirens became audible, the creature let out a roar of frustration and renewed its assault on the station with even greater ferocity. "It knows it's running out of time," Stephen said, tightening his grip on his gun. The next few moments were a blur of splintering wood, shattering glass and terrified screams. The creature, in its desperation, had redoubled its efforts to break in, and then, with a final thunderous crash, it succeeded. The barricaded door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal, and there, framed in the doorway, stood the stuff of nightmares. In the harsh glare of the station's fluorescent lights, we could finally see the creature in all its horrifying detail. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a grotesque amalgamation of animal features. Matted fur covered most of its form, but in places I could see patches of scales or something that looked unsettlingly like human skin. Its limbs were long and jointed in impossible ways, ending in massive claws that looked capable of tearing through steel. But it was the creature's face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was vaguely lupine in shape, with a protruding snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. But where there should have been eyes, there were only swirling voids of absolute darkness. Looking into those eyeless sockets, I felt as if I was staring into the abyss itself. For a moment, everything was still. We stood frozen in terror, and even the creature seemed to pause, as if savoring our fear. Then, several things happened at once. Stevens and Tyrese opened fire, their guns blazing in the confined space of the station. The creature roared in pain and anger, a sound that threatened to burst our eardrums. And from outside, I heard the screech of tires as the backup finally arrived. What followed was a chaotic blur of gunfire, screams, and inhuman roars. The creature, wounded but far from defeated, lashed out with its massive claws. Cooper went down, a spray of blood marking where those terrible talons had caught him. I raised the shotgun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. I fired, the recoil nearly knocking me off my feet. The creature staggered back, ichor spurting from multiple wounds, but it didn't fall. More gunshots rang out, this time from outside. The newly arrived officers had joined the fray, pouring fire into the station. The creature, realizing it was outmatched, let out one final earth-shaking roar. Then, with a speed that defied its size, it turned and burst through one of the barricaded windows. In moments, it had vanished into the darkness of the swamp, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. As the adrenaline began to fade, I became aware of the ringing in my ears, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Marcella was sobbing quietly, and Tyrese stood with his gun still raised, staring at the shattered window where the creature had escaped. Officers swarmed into the station, securing the area and calling for medical assistance. But even as they took charge of the situation, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the dark depths of Huckleberry Swamp. And something told me that this was just the beginning of a mystery that would change our lives forever. The hours following our encounter at the ranger station passed in a surreal blur. Paramedics arrived to treat our injuries, Marcella's sprained ankle, cuts and bruises for Tyrese and me, and more serious wounds for the unfortunate Ranger Cooper, who had taken the brunt of the creature's attack. As we were patched up, a steady stream of law enforcement officials arrived on the scene. Local police, state troopers, and even a few men in dark suits who refused to identify themselves beyond vague mentions of a federal task force. We were separated and questioned extensively. I found myself in one of the remaining intact rooms of the ranger station, sitting across from a stern-faced detective who introduced himself as Richard Hawthorne. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice gruff and no nonsense. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. And please, don't leave anything out, no matter how unusual it might seem." I took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the night. As I spoke, describing our terrifying chase through the swamp and the nightmarish creature that had pursued us, I could see the skepticism growing in Detective Hawthorne's eyes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, regarding me with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Mr. Thompson," he said slowly, "you do realize how this sounds, don't you?" I nodded wearily. "I know it sounds crazy. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it myself. But I swear to you, every word is true." Hawthorne sighed, rubbing his temples. As I reached down to help Marcella up, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. Just inches from where she had fallen lay a weathered shoe, caked with mud and partially hidden by leaves. Next to it were scraps of torn fabric, dark stains marring the tattered cloth. "Oh God," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of our heavy breathing. Tyrese followed my gaze, his eyes widening as he took in the grisly scene. "We need to move," he said urgently, already bending down to help Marcella to her feet. "Can you walk?" Marcella nodded, grimacing as she put weight on her injured ankle. "I think so, but I'll be slow." "Lean on me," I offered, draping her arm over my shoulder. "We'll go as fast as we can." As we set off again, our pace significantly reduced by Marcella's injury, I couldn't help but think about the owner of that shoe. Was it the missing hiker, Martin Greaves? And if so, what had happened to him? The torn clothing and dark stains painted a gruesome picture in my mind. Our pursuer seemed to have fallen back, but I could still hear occasional crashes in the underbrush behind us, reminding us that we were far from safe. The sound seemed to come from multiple directions now, as if we were being surrounded. "What is that thing?" Marcella whispered, her voice tight with pain and fear. "I don't know," Tyrese replied, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness around us. "But whatever it is, it's not natural." As if to confirm his words, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human. The sound sent shivers down my spine and seemed to reverberate in my very bones. We pressed on, every step a struggle against the treacherous terrain and our own mounting terror. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in around us, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. Strange whispers seemed to slide through the trees, just on the edge of hearing. A sour, musky stench filled the air, growing stronger with each passing moment. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flash of movement, too quick and too strange to properly process. But the glimpse I caught was enough to turn my blood to ice. It was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen or imagined. Its body was covered in mottled fur, matted and tangled with twigs and leaves. But it was the creature's shape that defied logic. Elongated limbs that seemed capable of bending in impossible ways, ending in viciously sharp claws. And its face. God, its face! In the brief moment I saw it, I noticed eyes like swirling pools of darkness, filled with a malevolent intelligence that was unmistakably predatory. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with terror. "It's right there!" We abandoned all pretense of stealth, crashing through the underbrush in a desperate bid for survival. Marcella whimpered in pain with each step, but adrenaline kept her moving. Tyrese took the lead, using his superior strength to forge a path through the dense vegetation. Behind us, the creature let out a bone-chilling screech and gave chase. I could hear it moving through the forest with unnatural speed and agility, far outpacing what should have been possible in such dense undergrowth. "We can't outrun it," Marcella gasped, her face pale with pain and fear. She was right. With her injured ankle slowing us down and the creature's inhuman speed, it was only a matter of time before it caught up to us. We needed a plan, and fast. "Tyrese," I shouted between ragged breaths. "Isn't there a ranger station nearby?" Tyrese's face lit up with sudden hope. "Yes, about half a mile east of here. If we can make it there, we might have a chance." With renewed determination, we changed course, heading east as best we could while navigating the treacherous swamp. Every splash of our feet in the shallow water seemed to echo in the unnaturally quiet forest. The creature's pursuit had gone silent, which was somehow even more terrifying than hearing it crash through the underbrush. As we struggled onward, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of our pursuer. What was this thing that defied all logical explanation? Was it some kind of undiscovered species? A government experiment gone wrong? Or something even more sinister? Something that shouldn't exist in our rational scientific world? My musings were cut short as Tyrese suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. For a moment, all I could hear was our labored breathing and the pounding of my own heart. Then faintly but unmistakably, I heard voices in the distance. "The ranger station," Tyrese whispered, his voice filled with relief. "We're almost there." But our relief was short-lived. From behind us came a sound that could only be described as a roar. A sound filled with rage and hunger that shook the very air around us. The creature had realized its prey was about to escape. "Go," I yelled, pushing Marcella forward. "Run for the station." We burst from the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood a sturdy log building, the ranger station. Light spilled from its windows, a beacon of hope in the darkness that had surrounded us. As we sprinted across the open ground, I risked a glance back. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The creature had emerged from the forest, its true form fully visible in the moonlight that now broke through the clouds. It was even more terrifying than the glimpses I'd caught before, a nightmarish amalgamation of animal and something utterly alien. Its eyes locked onto us, filled with an intelligence and malevolence that was unmistakably otherworldly. We reached the ranger station door just as the creature let out another ear-splitting roar. Tyrese wrenched the door open and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. Two startled rangers jumped to their feet, hands instinctively moving to their sidearms. "What the hell?" one of them exclaimed. "Lock the door!" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "There's something out there." The rangers looked confused, but the terror in our eyes must have convinced them of the seriousness of the situation. One of them quickly secured the door while the other moved to the radio. "This is Ranger Stevens at Huckleberry Station," he said into the mic. "We have a situation here, requesting immediate backup." As the ranger called for help, I helped Marcella to a chair, finally able to examine her injured ankle. It was swollen and starting to bruise, but thankfully didn't appear to be broken. Tyrese was at the window, peering out into the darkness. "I don't see it," he muttered. "Where did it go?" As if in answer to his question, an unearthly howl split the night, causing us all to jump. It was close, too close. "What exactly is out there?" one of the rangers asked, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered gun. I opened my mouth to respond, but how could I possibly explain what we'd seen? How could I describe a creature that defied all logic and reason? Before I could formulate an answer, a tremendous crash shook the building. Wood splintered, and I turned just in time to see a monstrous clawed hand punching through the wall. The night was far from over, and our ordeal had only just begun. The ranger station erupted into chaos as the creature's massive clawed hand withdrew, leaving a gaping hole in the wall. Splinters of wood littered the floor, and the acrid smell of the beast's musk filled the air. "What the hell is that thing?" One of the rangers, the one who had been on the radio, shouted, his face pale with shock. "I don't know," Tyrese replied, his voice tight with fear. "But it's been chasing us through the swamp for the last hour." The other ranger, Stevens, I recalled, had drawn his sidearm and was aiming it at the hole in the wall. "Whatever it is, it's not getting in here," he declared, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Another crash rocked the building, this time from the roof. Dust and debris rained down on us as the creature's claws tore at the shingles, searching for a way in. Marcella whimpered in fear, clutching her injured ankle. I moved to her side, trying to offer what comfort I could. "It's going to be okay," I said, wishing I could believe my own words. "Help is on the way." The radio crackled to life, startling us all. "Huckleberry Station, this is dispatch. We've got units en route to your location. It's 20 minutes. What's your situation?" The ranger who had made the initial call rushed to respond. "This is Cooper at Huckleberry. We're under attack by some kind of creature. It's trying to break in. We need immediate assistance." "Copy that, Huckleberry. Help is coming." "Hold tight, 20 minutes. We just had to survive for 20 minutes. But as another bone-jarring impact shook the station, 20 minutes seemed like an eternity. "We need to barricade the windows and doors," Tyrese said, taking charge of the situation. His ranger training was kicking in, pushing aside his fear. "And we need weapons. Anything we can use to defend ourselves if that thing gets in." We sprang into action, dragging heavy filing cabinets in front of the windows and piling furniture against the door. The Rangers distributed what weapons they had: another handgun for Tyrese, a shotgun for me, and a large hunting knife for Marcella. As we worked, the creature continued its assault on the building. Each impact sent tremors through the floor, and the sound of splintering wood told us that our shelter wouldn't hold forever. "What do we do if it gets in before help arrives?" Marcella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Stevens, the ranger with the handgun, answered grimly, "We fight. We fight with everything we've got." The next few minutes passed in a blur of tense silence, punctuated by the creature's relentless attacks. We huddled in the center of the room, weapons at the ready, jumping at every sound. Suddenly the assault stopped. The abrupt silence was almost as terrifying as the chaos that had preceded it. "Where did it go?" Cooper whispered, his eyes darting from window to window. As if in answer, a low, rumbling growl emanated from just outside the station. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in our very bones, filling us with a primal terror. Then slowly, deliberately, something began to scratch at the door. It wasn't the violent assault of before, but somehow this methodical approach was even more terrifying. It was as if the creature was taunting us, letting us know that it could get in whenever it wanted. "It's toying with us," I said, my mouth dry with fear. Tyrese nodded grimly. "It's intelligent. More intelligent than any animal I've ever encountered." The scratching continued, occasionally interspersed with that bone-chilling growl. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into an eternity of terror. Then, just as the tension had reached an unbearable level, we heard it, the distant wail of sirens. "The backup!" Cooper exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "They're almost here." But our relief was short-lived. As soon as the sirens became audible, the creature let out a roar of frustration and renewed its assault on the station with even greater ferocity. "It knows it's running out of time," Stevens said, tightening his grip on his gun. The next few moments were a blur of splintering wood, shattering glass, and terrified screams. The creature, in its desperation, had redoubled its efforts to break in. And then, with a final thunderous crash, it succeeded. The barricaded door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal. And there, framed in the doorway, stood the stuff of nightmares. In the harsh glare of the station's fluorescent lights, we could finally see the creature in all its horrifying detail. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a grotesque amalgamation of animal features. Matted fur covered most of its form, but in places I could see patches of scales or something that looked unsettlingly like human skin. Its limbs were long and jointed in impossible ways, ending in massive claws that looked capable of tearing through steel. But it was the creature's face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. It was vaguely lupine in shape, with a protruding snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. But where there should have been eyes, there were only swirling voids of absolute darkness. Looking into those eyeless sockets, I felt as if I was staring into the abyss itself. For a moment, everything was still. We stood frozen in terror, and even the creature seemed to pause, as if savoring our fear. Then, several things happened at once. Stevens and Tyrese opened fire, their guns blazing in the confined space of the station. The creature roared in pain and anger, a sound that threatened to burst our eardrums. And from outside, I heard the screech of tires as the backup finally arrived. What followed was a chaotic blur of gunfire, screams, and inhuman roars. The creature, wounded but far from defeated, lashed out with its massive claws. Cooper went down, a spray of blood marking where those terrible talons had caught him. I raised the shotgun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. I fired, the recoil nearly knocking me off my feet. The creature staggered back, ichor spurting from multiple wounds, but it didn't fall. More gunshots rang out, this time from outside. The newly arrived officers had joined the fray, pouring fire into the station. The creature, realizing it was outmatched, let out one final earth-shaking roar. Then, with a speed that defied its size, it turned and burst through one of the barricaded windows. In moments, it had vanished into the darkness of the swamp, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. As the adrenaline began to fade, I became aware of the ringing in my ears, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Marcella was sobbing quietly, and Therese stood with his gun still raised, staring at the shattered window where the creature had escaped. Officers swarmed into the station, securing the area and calling for medical assistance. But even as they took charge of the situation, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the dark depths of Huckleberry Swamp, and something told me that this was just the beginning of a mystery that would change our lives forever. The hours following our encounter at the ranger station passed in a surreal blur. Paramedics arrived to treat our injuries. Marcella's sprained ankle, cuts and bruises for Tyrese and me, and more serious wounds for the unfortunate Ranger Cooper, who had taken the brunt of the creature's attack. As we were patched up, a steady stream of law enforcement officials arrived on the scene. Local police, state troopers, and even a few men in dark suits who refused to identify themselves beyond vague mentions of a federal task force. We were separated and questioned extensively. I found myself in one of the remaining intact rooms of the ranger station, sitting across from a stern-faced detective who introduced himself as Richard Hawthorne. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice gruff and no-nonsense, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. And please, don't leave anything out, no matter how unusual it might seem." I took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the night. As I spoke, describing our terrifying chase through the swamp and the nightmarish creature that had pursued us, I could see the skepticism growing in Detective Hawthorne's eyes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, regarding me with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Mr. Thompson," he said slowly, "you do realize how this sounds, don't you?" I nodded wearily. "I know it sounds crazy. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it myself. But I swear to you, every word is true." Hawthorne sighed, rubbing his temples. When Reeves looked up, her face was pale. "We've got a problem," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These tracks, they're not just from one creature anymore." A chill ran down my spine as we all gathered around to look. Sure enough, Mingled with the now familiar prints of our quarry were other equally disturbing tracks. Some were similar but smaller, as if made by juvenile versions of the creature. Others were completely different, long, sinuous marks that looked like they'd been made by something serpentine, and what appeared to be huge bird-like tracks with wickedly curved talons. "What does this mean?" Marcella asked, her voice trembling slightly. Hawthorne's face was grim. "It means we're dealing with more than just one monster. There's a whole ecosystem of these things out here." The implications of his words hit us like a physical blow. One creature had been terrifying enough. The thought of an entire population of these things was almost too much to bear. "We need to turn back," Tyrese said, voicing what we were all thinking. "We're not equipped to handle this." But before anyone could respond, a blood-curdling screech split the air. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, part bird, part big cat, and part something utterly alien. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating through the trees and making the very ground beneath our feet tremble. "Run!" Reeves yelled, all pretense of stealth abandoned. We took off, crashing through the underbrush in blind panic. I could hear something moving through the canopy above us, branches snapping and leaves rustling as it kept pace effortlessly. Suddenly, Marcella cried out. I turned to see her stumble and fall, her foot caught in a tangle of roots. Without thinking, I rushed back to help her. As I reached down to free her foot, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up just in time to see a massive shape descending from the trees. It was like the creature we'd encountered in the swamp, but different. This one was sleeker, its limbs even more elongated, ending in what looked like hooked talons. Its body was covered in a mix of scales and feathers, and its head was distinctly avian, with a wickedly curved beak. Time seemed to slow down as the creature fell towards us. I could see every detail with horrifying clarity. The iridescent sheen of its feathers, the saliva dripping from its beak, the swirling voids of its eyes fixed on us with predatory intent. Just as I thought it was all over, a deafening bang rang out. The creature screeched in pain and veered off course, crashing into the underbrush a few feet away from us. Hawthorne stood there, his gun still smoking. "Go!" he yelled.
"I'll hold it off."
I didn't need to be told twice. I hauled Marcella to her feet and we ran. Behind us I could hear more gunshots, interspersed with inhuman screeches and the sound of something large thrashing through the vegetation. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like they were made of lead. Finally, we burst out of the dense forest into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and empty. "In there!" Reeves called out, already moving towards the structure. We piled inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The interior was musty and filled with cobwebs, but it was shelter. Tyrese and I quickly began barricading the door and windows with whatever furniture we could find. As the adrenaline began to wear off, I realized Hawthorne wasn't with us. "Where's the detective?" I asked, looking around frantically. Reeves's face was grim. He stayed behind to give us a chance to escape. We can only hope he made it out alive. A heavy silence fell over us as the reality of our situation sank in. We were trapped in an unknown part of the forest, surrounded by creatures that defied explanation, with no idea if help was coming. As night began to fall, casting long shadows through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, we huddled together in the center of the cabin. The sounds of the forest outside had changed, filled now with strange calls and movements that sent shivers down our spines. "What do we do now?" Marcella whispered, her voice tight with fear. Reeves checked her weapon, her face set in grim determination. "We survived the night. And come morning, we find a way out of this forest. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than we thought. We need to get this information to people who can help." As we settled in for a long, terrifying night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple monster hunt. The creatures, the strange forest, the legends of Witch's Hollow, it all hinted at a mystery far deeper and more dangerous than we could have imagined. Little did we know, our ordeal in the cabin that night would be just the beginning of a journey that would take us to the very edge of reality, challenging everything we thought we knew about the world and our place in it. The cabin creaked and groaned around us as the wind picked up outside. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering light of the single lantern Reeves had in her pack. We had pushed all the furniture to the center of the room, creating a small fortress where we now huddled, backs to each other, facing outward towards the windows and doors. Every sound from outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Was that just the wind in the trees, or something more sinister? Was that scratching at the door just branches being blown against the wood, or claws seeking entry? "We should take turns keeping watch," Reeves said, her voice low but steady. 2-hour shifts. "I'll take first watch." We nodded in agreement, grateful for her calm leadership in this nightmare scenario. As the others tried to get some rest, I found myself unable to close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw that bird-like creature descending from the trees, its void-like eyes fixed on me with murderous intent. About an hour into Reeves's watch, a new sound cut through the night, a low, mournful howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was joined by another, then another, until the air was filled with an otherworldly chorus that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "What is that?" Marcella whispered, sitting up from where she had been trying to sleep. Therese, his ranger training evident in the way he cocked his head to listen, frowned deeply. "It's not like any animal call I've ever heard. It's almost like they're singing." As we listened, I realized he was right. There was a haunting melody to the sounds, a rhythm that pulsed through the air and seemed to resonate in our very bones. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a siren song luring sailors to their doom. Suddenly, Reeves stiffened. "Look!" she hissed, pointing towards one of the boarded-up windows. We all turned to look, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Through a small gap in the planks, I could see movement outside. Shapes were moving in the darkness, fluid and ethereal. They seemed to glow faintly with an inner light, casting eerie shadows as they danced through the trees. "What are they?" I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the mesmerizing sight. "I don't know," Reeves replied, her voice tight with tension. "But whatever they are, they're not natural." As we watched, transfixed, one of the shapes drew closer to the cabin. It paused just outside the window, and for a moment I could make out more details. It was vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, too fluid, as if they weren't constrained by bones or joints. Its head was elongated and eyeless, with a mouth that seemed to take up half its face. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned to face the window. Even though it had no eyes, I felt with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at me. A voice, not heard with my ears but felt in my mind, whispered, "Come out, join us. Become one with the forest." I recoiled, scrambling backwards until my back hit the far wall of the cabin. The others looked at me in alarm. "What's wrong?" Therese asked, reaching out to steady me. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. How could I describe the alien presence I had felt in my mind, the terrifying allure of its invitation? Before I could find my voice, a new sound cut through the night, a human scream filled with pain and terror. We all froze, exchanging horrified glances. "That came from the east," Reeves said, already moving towards the door. "Someone's out there. We can't go out there," Marcella protested. "Those things are still out there." Reeves paused, her hand on the makeshift barricade. "We can't just leave someone to die. Besides, it could be Hawthorne. The mention of the detective's name settled it. We couldn't abandon him, not after he had risked his life to save us. Quickly and quietly, we removed the barricade from the door. Reeves took point, her rifle at the ready. Tyrese and I flanked Marcella, who was still limping slightly from her earlier fall. As we stepped out into the night, the ethereal shapes in the forest seemed to retreat, melting back into the shadows. The haunting melody faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. We moved as quietly as we could through the underbrush, following the direction of the scream. The forest around us felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with normal wildlife. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and more than once I caught glimpses of glowing eyes watching us from the darkness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we came to a small clearing. What we saw there would haunt my nightmares for years to come. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk easily 10 feet in diameter. But this was no ordinary tree. Its bark seemed to pulse with an inner light, and its branches moved and writhed like tentacles. And there, half absorbed into the trunk, was a human figure. With a jolt of horror, I recognized Hawthorne. He was alive, but barely. His lower body had been pulled into the tree, the bark growing over his skin. His face was a mask of pain and terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. As we stood there, frozen in shock and horror, Hawthorne's eyes found us. "Run!" he managed to gasp out. "It's a trap. They're not what they seem. The whole forest is a lee—" His words were cut off as the tree pulsed, pulling him deeper into its trunk. In moments, he had vanished entirely, leaving no trace that he had ever been there. For a long moment, we stood in stunned silence. Then as one, we turned to run, but it was too late. The clearing was no longer empty. Surrounding us on all sides were the creatures we had glimpsed earlier. The bird-like one that had attacked us, the ethereal dancers, and others too strange and terrible to describe. And behind them all, towering over everything, was a shape that could only be our original quarry from the swamp. As the creatures closed in, I realized with a sinking feeling that we had never been the hunters. From the very beginning, we had been the prey. And now, deep in this impossible forest, our hunt had come to its inevitable, terrifying conclusion. The true nature of Witch's Hollow and the dark secret at the heart of the forest was about to be revealed, and I feared that the knowledge would come at a cost higher than any of us were prepared to pay. Time seemed to stand still as we faced the nightmarish menagerie that surrounded us. The creatures were unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined, a twisted menagerie that defied the laws of nature and sanity. The bird-like creature that had attacked us earlier was there, its feathers gleaming with an oily iridescence in the dim light. Beside it stood something that looked like a cross between a wolf and a praying mantis, its multiple limbs ending in wickedly sharp claws. The ethereal dancers we had glimpsed from the cabin window swayed hypnotically, their forms constantly shifting and changing. And there, looming over them all, was the creature from the swamp. Seeing it again, in the heart of its domain, I realized that our memories hadn't done it justice. It was even more terrifying than I remembered, a massive, hulking form that seemed to be composed of shadow and malevolence-given flesh. As we stood there, frozen in terror, I felt a presence brush against my mind. It was alien and vast, a consciousness so foreign that my brain struggled to comprehend it. And then, to my shock, it spoke. "Welcome," a voice resonated in my head, somehow conveying amusement and hunger in equal measure. "We've been waiting for you." I glanced at the others and saw from their expressions that they were hearing it too. Reeves had her rifle raised, but her hands were shaking. Tyrese stood protectively in front of Marcella, though what protection he could offer against these beings, I couldn't imagine. What are you?" I managed to stammer out, my voice barely above a whisper. The massive creature tilted its head, an eerily human gesture on such an inhuman form. "We are the forest," it replied, the capital F evident in its mental voice. "We are the guardians of the spaces between worlds, the keepers of secrets long forgotten by your kind." "But you've been killing people," Marcella said, her voice trembling but determined. "The missing hiker, the attacks at the campground." A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the assembled creatures. "Killing?" the voice in our head said. "No, not killing, transforming, elevating. Those who enter our domain are given a choice, to become one with the forest, or to leave this plane of existence entirely." With a gesture from the massive creature, the tree that had absorbed hawthorn began to move. Its bark split open, revealing a writhing mass of tendrils and pulsing organic matter. And there in the center was Hawthorne, or what used to be Hawthorne. His body had been transformed, merged with the living tissue of the tree. His skin was now bark, his hair leaves and moss. And his eyes were now the same swirling voids that all the creatures shared. "He chose to join us," the forest said, "as have many others over the centuries. And now you must make the same choice." The revelation hit us like a physical blow. The idea that Hawthorne, and who knows how many others, had willingly chosen to become. This was almost too much to comprehend. "You're lying," Reeves said, her voice shaking but defiant. No one would choose this. The forest's amusement rippled through our minds. "Are you so sure? Think of the knowledge we offer, the power, the chance to be part of something greater than your limited human existence." As it spoke, I felt a strange pull in my mind. Visions flashed before my eyes, glimpses of other worlds, of knowledge beyond human comprehension, of power that defied the laws of physics. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly alien. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Beside me, I could see the others struggling with similar visions. Marcella had fallen to her knees, her eyes wide and unfocused. Therese was gritting his teeth, his hands clenched into fists as he fought against the mental assault. "Stop it!" I yelled, both out loud and in my mind. "Leave us alone!" To my surprise, the visions ceased. The forest seemed to regard us with renewed interest. "Interesting," it mused. "Your will is stronger than most. Perhaps that is why you were drawn here." "Drawn here?" Reeves asked, her voice hoarse. "What do you mean?" "Did you think it was mere chance that led you to our domain?" The forest replied. "We have been calling to you, to all of you, since your first encounter in the swamp. You are special, chosen, and now you must decide, join us or perish." The creatures around us began to close in, their forms shifting and writhing in ways that hurt to look at. I felt panic rising in my chest. We were outnumbered, outmatched, and had nowhere to run. But then, just as all hope seemed lost, Tyrese spoke up. "Wait," he said, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. "You said we have a choice. That means you can't force us to join you, right?" The forest paused, and I felt a flicker of something, uncertainty, respect. It was hard to tell with such an alien consciousness. "That is correct," it finally admitted. "The choice must be willing. It is the central tenet of our existence." "Then I choose to leave," Therese said firmly. "We all do. Let us go, and we won't tell anyone about this place. It'll remain your secret." For a long moment there was silence. The creatures around us remained still, awaiting the forest's decision. I held my breath, hardly daring to hope. Finally, the forest spoke. "Your offer is acceptable, but know this, once you leave, you can never return. The knowledge of this place will fade from your minds, becoming nothing more than a half-remembered dream. And should you ever speak of what you've seen here, no one will believe you." Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. We were going to survive. We were going to go home. But then Marcella spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "What if? What if one of us wanted to stay?" We all turned to look at her in shock. She was still on her knees, but her eyes were clear now, filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Marcella, no," I said, reaching out to her. "You can't." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "But don't you see, Jake? The things they could teach us, the worlds we could explore. It's everything I've ever dreamed of." The forest's satisfaction was palpable. "The choice is yours," it said. "But choose quickly. The offer will not remain open indefinitely." For a moment I thought we'd lost her, but then Tyrese knelt down beside her, taking her hand. "Marcella," he said gently, "I know it's tempting, but think about your family, your friends. Think about all the good you can do in our world. We need you there." Marcella hesitated, torn between two impossible choices. Then slowly she nodded. "You're right," she whispered. "I want to go home." The forest's disappointment was clear, but it made no move to stop us. "So be it," it said. "Go now and do not look back. For if you do, you may find yourselves unable to leave. We didn't need to be told twice." Supporting each other, we turned and began to make our way out of the clearing. True to the forest's word, none of the creatures tried to stop us. As we walked, I could feel the memory of what had happened already beginning to fade. The details were becoming fuzzy, the terror less acute. By the time we reached the edge of Witch's Hollow, it felt more like a particularly vivid nightmare than reality. We emerged from the forest as dawn was breaking, the pale light of the sun feeling alien after the otherworldly glow of the forest. A search and rescue team found us a few hours later, dehydrated and exhausted, but alive. In the days and weeks that followed, we tried to piece together what had happened. But true to the forest's word, our memories were fragmented and dreamlike. We couldn't agree on the details, and the more we tried to remember, the more it slipped away. The official report listed Hawthorne as missing, presumed dead. The attacks were attributed to an unusually aggressive bear, which was supposedly hunted down and killed. Life, it seemed, was determined to return to normal. But sometimes, late at night, I find myself staring out at the distant tree line, and for just a moment I swear I can hear a faint otherworldly melody carried on the wind. In those moments, I feel a pull, an urge to return to the forest and the impossible choice we left behind. But I resist. I made my choice, and I have to believe it was the right one. The forest and its secrets remain hidden, a mystery that will haunt the edges of my consciousness for the rest of my days. And yet I can't help but wonder, what if we had chosen differently? What wonders and horrors might we have discovered? The question lingers, unanswered and unanswerable, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown terrors that lurk just out of sight.